Q&A from the people who we heard this morning. So we have Jack Fisher, Jasper O'Connor, Katie Sanderson and Shantanu. We're just going to go through some of the points that were raised, and this is a chance for all of you to ask questions, make comments and contribute if you'd like to.
And if I could also say that in terms of what's happening in this room over the weekend, there's quite a disparate line of events, but obviously a connection between each of them. And our tagline for the weekend, our food, what's the story? That's what we're trying to get to, or get some sort of sense of it. And what is the future? And also, local hero, global hero is our sort of, if we were to be branded with anything this weekend, that's what we would like the brand to be. And what's happening at Kilbally National School is an absolute epitomizes that thing.
I have chickens at home, and I have two young kids. We obviously have broody chickens. We decided to get some, we don't have a cockerel. We got some eggs put under them, and one hatched. And my children are so obsessed now by this poor, godforsaken little chick, that they want to sleep, find ways to want to sleep with it. They want to make it a little bed, and its life will be hell if that's allowed. But it's wonderful how engaged they are. So it's just wonderful to hear these kind of projects. And as Rory said, really what we need is the Department of Education to get involved and the Department of Health to realise the implications then and the positive benefits of that. So we're going to have a Q&A. It's informal. So just wave at me, put your hand up if you want to say something. We have, I'm sure, roving mics. But if it doesn't reach you in time, just shout. If you want to tell us who you are, that's wonderful. If you don't, that's fine. I'm going to start, Jack, with you. You mentioned something there about the idea, with Dillisk, the simple idea that it generated an awful lot of good feeling when you started it. And yet it can be very, very hard for people when they want to set up something at a very local level with certain themes that are global. I mean, themes that everyone involved in food production knows are very obvious and battle with. What are the problems about setting it up? Because it can be quite intimidating to take that step and actually do it. An awful lot of people I meet have really good ideas, but they're always a little bit reluctant to go with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest bridge to cross in that sense is just taking the chance, I think for us, we really had a sound and comprehensive belief in the idea. So from the start, we felt, we felt confident and we felt hopeful. And with that as, a part of the approach, or with that kind of at the root of the approach, really believing in the idea, it certainly felt to us that people responded to that. People responded to our kind of honest, earnest enterprise. And that, I mean, the hard part, I don't know, maybe the hard part is just really kind of, having the belief in the idea, because, pardon?
Being vulnerable.
Yeah, maybe kind of putting yourself out there a bit and opening yourself up to failure.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, taking the chance, maybe just taking the chance and taking that little leap. But I think once you do it, people, people are kind of inspired by it, and people want to share in that kind of the hope of the idea or whatever it is. So I think, maybe that could be the tricky part, or certainly one of the tricky parts is just kind of putting yourself out there, opening yourself up to criticism and things like that.
And I suppose, Katie, not being too concerned actually with what people think, just going for it.
Yeah, I think so. I've done quite a lot of projects even before Dillisk, and some of them are in kind of weird and wacky locations. And I think if you stopped and you let fear be the kind of overriding emotion, then you're never going to get started. And if you go with the part that's kind of like uncomfortably scary but exciting and nervous and could come up with something really beautiful, and it might fail a little bit, but you might learn loads from that, that's kind of an amazing thing.
Jack, you're nodding your head there.
No, I think in terms of taking that leap of faith, it's a big step, and it can be quite daunting. But I'm sure the guys to the left here will agree with me in the sense that by taking a leap of faith, you learn along the way. Like, we've been going for 2 years, and I think it's by being kind of brave and by being kind of innovative in whatever approach you're taking. Sure, it may not be perfect going in on day one, but as long as you're learning along the way and really kind of fine-tuning what you're doing, that's the best we can ask for. But yeah, taking that leap of faith is the first big step.
Jack, I was interested listening to you talk and one of the videos you showed, and this notion that the way we are living is making us sick. Mm-hmm. And I suppose it gets to the heart of what you're trying to do with young people in particular. The best ways to engage young people with that notion. It's obviously a very negative thing to start off your life with, isn't it? And in general, young people try not to think too much about those things.
Yeah, as we often, we think about these diseases as something which is kind of often inevitable in life. Unfortunately, we're all going to die eventually, but in terms of trying to have that quality of life, and in terms of, and as you mentioned, that these kind of topics on the periphery are quite negative and quite complicated. So what we try to do is try to really simplify the information and try and make it engaging. And it is difficult, and we live in a very information dense world, where we have social media and we're constantly inundated with information. But by having information and having content which is innovative in nature and really clean in design, then we can really tap into what young people are using in terms of to get their information. I think a great example of that is just this week, Jamie Oliver's Food Foundation had their Food Revolution Day, which was yesterday. And that's a great example of how young people coming together and using social media and really engaging in the topic of food and also linking that to health. But yeah, in terms of creating clean, innovative content which is understandable by many, can really help kind of engage young people with this topic.
Katie, one of your, just what I've read about you is one of your major concerns in what we are trying to do, when I say we, everyone involved in food, is waste. And it's such a critical issue. I was speaking to someone who is quite involved in dealing with it in Ireland, and he said one of the biggest problems about not addressing food waste is that we just don't see it enough. And we hide it away, and we're too happy to hide it away.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think within my own work in the last few years, it's become something that I've focused on loads more, just because I felt like I was wasting too much. I think I had been asked to do a dinner for some people up in Dublin based all on food waste, and it was such an eye-opener that this was stuff that I went to different kind of companies, food suppliers and stuff in Dublin, and this was all stuff that was getting thrown out. And at one point I had this big bin in front of me, and it had all these like little perfect baby carrots that were flown in from Kenya, and I'd kind of have a connection to Kenya, and I know kind of roughly where these carrots were grown in Kenya, and I just thought about all of the effort and the kind of love and dedication and stuff, and the fact that it had been on a plane all the way over to be thrown out in a bin in Ireland, and it just, I cried. I couldn't really understand the kind of system in that. And so one of the things that we did when we started our project was very much thinking about how we could break that down. And I'm not saying that we had no waste. It's really difficult to run any type of restaurant or a project and have no waste. But I think that if you put it as a thing that you're focusing on, then you can try and get closer to it. And just by starting to do little things, I think like having a menu that doesn't change so often, by trying to use the whole of something rather than kind of be a chef that decides that you want like the fennel fronds, but you don't want the fennel. Like that kind of way of thinking is bizarre, Like deciding, this whole like nose to tail eating is so much a better mentality than deciding that we want certain parts of vegetables or meat or anything,
Jack?
Jasper.
Oh,
Jasper.
sorry.
Jasper. Sorry, I'm calling you Jack. Jasper.
I don't know. It's in relation to the project that we were doing. It was maybe it was made a little bit easier for us in the sense that a lot of our food waste, all of our food waste, with the exception of one or two things, we could compost, we could use. The fact that we were in the countryside and we had our own little garden, we were in a position where we were able to put back a lot of the things that were left over. We were able to reuse a lot of our waste, whether it was for feeding the seagulls or for putting on the beds, like in the garden.
The idea of feeding seagulls.
Yeah, but that was our way. We had like certain kind of food waste products that you wouldn't be able to put into the compost that we were able to feed to the birds and things like that. So it actually kind of had a nice cycle to it. I guess you're not really. You can't really avail of that sort of a system if you're in an urban place, or it could be a little bit more difficult, I suppose. But just to have it as a priority when you're setting out, could definitely change the nature of your work and the way you work in general.
The person I spoke to specifically about the issue of food waste said that actually what we need to do, and Shantanu, I suppose this is part of what you do, is the power of images, is photograph it more. So he was saying, for example, the Tidy Towns groups, when you collect all that incredible rubbish and you do your amazing work, photograph it. post it. And then that feeds into the whole story of food and what it takes to actually get food on the table or buy food in a convenience store or whatever. But the power of images being incredibly important and part of that particular question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, photographs are one of those things that you can use it to manipulate people negatively, but you can also send a pretty positive message out there. I think food waste is an interesting one to photograph because you got to find something interesting in it, which often it doesn't look like a lot. Depending what it is, I think it's probably not so much about splashing more images in front of people's faces, but actually when we can learn how to approach food waste in rural areas and we find it easier to do so, how can we actually transfer that into urban settings? Because that seems to always be the problem, is that people in the countryside seem to be able to find a far more balanced existence. But as you get closer and closer to cities, that balance starts to tip in a different direction. And so you can flash more and more images to people, but to actually come up with solutions of how to bring that transfer from this place to this place is probably what's more important. And you could probably achieve some of that with imagery, but first you need to have the idea to be able to bring to people, because I've been reading this book and telling all my friends about this book recently, which talks about human beings being inherently lazy, and that our system of thinking tries to basically, there's two systems and one doesn't want to be involved as much, and that unfortunately is the problem-solving one. And the intuitive mind will take over and do what it can, and it only really wants to engage system 2 when it needs to.
What's the book called?
It's called Thinking Fast and Slow.
And you have to read it, of course, which if you're lazy, you're never going to do. Rory?
Yeah, just to add, for whatever it's worth, as a cook, to this particular part of the conversation as regards waste. I mean, there's waste. And when I was growing up, I spent a considerable portion of my life watching my mother looking into the fridge to see what she could retrieve for supper. And so she knew how to use up the leftovers, which is almost an unusable word nowadays. And this goes back to food education and teaching people how to cook. And the more people know how to cook, the less waste actually you have, because what you might perceive as waste is actually something that can make a delicious leftover supper. I mean, and it's also back to people's knowledge of food, if we're talking specifically about food waste. I mean, I know certainly we've had students who've gone to cook for clients who, and the specification to the cook was, you buy for today's meals, whatever is left over after today, we can't use tomorrow, because clearly we couldn't possibly use it tomorrow because it would be bad. So it's about education and knowledge, and not just teaching people how to make a perfect steak Diane, but how to make a fantastic shepherd's pie, and how to use the scraps off the roast chicken, how to make a broth, all of those things. And again, we would say, in a very ideal world, we'd love to see that happening, like some of the national schools where it's happening, but also in every secondary school in the country.
It reminds me of a story, very, very brief story. I live in an urban area, but I kept pigs in my back garden, and my local fruit and veg shop had this bin, and they threw out all the most incredible fruit and veg. So I used to go up every Friday with loads and loads of buckets and take all the veg out. So you're talking about beautiful things of strawberries and asparagus and everything. And I bring them back. And my mum, who lives beside me, stopped me down the laneway, and she would have her own beautiful ceramic bucket, which is a bowl, and she would take out everything, and then her and Dad would have the most amazing meal. And so she was eating food from a bin, but it was perfect food that was absolutely delicious. Of course, I then went on. I'm not from wartime era, which I think is very much in her mentality. Her mum lived in the war and knew what it was like to not have anything, and I think that's very ingrained in her brain. I'm not like that. And so I gave these to my pigs. I ate the pigs eventually, all of them, but these pigs had the most incredible diet. But it was a very interesting, I suppose, generational thing as well, which was a little bit, as you're saying, that we are quite privileged. Certainly my generation is very privileged and don't really know what it's like to actually not have things.
Yeah, I think maybe even spoiled. A lasting memory of a story from my mother was she's talked about during the war in Johnstown in County Kilkenny, when a box of oranges after the war arrived into the village. the word went out, before mobile phones or email or even people had landlines, that a box of oranges had arrived into the village. The entire 10-mile radius around descended on the shop in the village to try and buy an orange because they were so longing to see the colour of it, the taste of it, and that would have been doled out segment by segment. We have become so spoiled, and we've forgotten so much about how food is grown and produced and the effort of the farmers and all of the purveyors to get it from soil to plate. We need to think about it a bit more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I suppose the corollary to that is also we can't forget that 10 to 15% of Ireland is in food poverty, which is a whole separate issue. Jack, you were saying about the video there was talking about the spectre of obviously climate change and all the limits that will put on food production and chronic diseases. When you're talking to younger people, what is the big issue that engages them the most, or the question that they're most concerned about?
In relation to climate change?
In relation, in the broad relation in terms of what you're trying to do with diseases. I mean, is there anything that they particularly are concerned about? I mean, most people would probably argue that climate change for younger people is much more on the agenda than older generations.
Yeah, I think it's really trying to kind of break down some of the myths. If we're talking about health or we're talking about climate change, we're kind of really trying to break down some of the myths which are surrounding these topics. But really kind of touching back on the point, especially in relation to climate change, we try to be very positive in our approach because there's no point in sitting here and say, well, we're all doomed. Well, we have the time. We have the time to make the right change, and if we do that, in a very global scale, we have these Sustainable Development Goals, which the UN announced late last year, and so we have a 15-year gap that we can, if we make small changes around the world and really combine both, because again, health and our climate are so interrelated. I was just thinking then when we talk about food waste. So when we talk about in the need to have improved or reduced food waste both in rural and urban areas, we're living in a time where there's, for the first time in human history, that there's more people living in urban areas than rural areas. And it's insane that, as you guys know, in terms of one third of all food produced for human consumption is food waste or wasted. And it's crazy to think that, considering that around the world there's millions of children who are undernourished, which therefore leads to diseases. And there's also now the growing burden that there's children who are overnourished, and obviously we know whether the effects of obesity are well documented. But really trying to show tangible solutions, like how we can improve our health and our climate, and do both at the same time, because that's really, really key. And also being very positive, because there's no point being negative. We have to change this, and we will. So positivity is the key.
I've just got a little idea, which I think is a good thing to do, which I've done a few times, is to change the bin bags that you have at home or in your restaurant or in your cafe, and for 1 week to use see-through bins. Because it's kind of like what you were saying, Ella, about like taking pictures of food waste. But the thing is that we have this thing that as soon as it goes into the bin that we don't have to look at it anymore, and it's not our problem. So when we see something that's gone off a little bit in our fridge, we take it out and we put it in the bin, and then it's gone. But I think that when you do these tiny little things at home or in your cafe where you see this waste, you start to see the problem. And then the problems get bigger, and then you start answering these other bigger problems as well, But maybe just if for the next week, if anyone wants to do that, it's kind of a...
There's interesting research
thing
about
to
that. Someone told me recently that actually when you do that at festivals, because food festivals are a big issue around Ireland when it comes to waste, and when you do that, and local county councils have experimented with see-through bags, that the whole thing improves, because you're just tapping into a sense of people's guilt and awareness that if they put, for example, something into a bag that is clearly marked recyclable, that they shouldn't do that. But if you can see it, they won't do it as well. So it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Jasper, one thing that you had mentioned was using seaweed, and I suppose in terms of allocations of resources, we know on the west coast of Ireland, seaweed is becoming quite a big question now because of an awful lot of people are now wanting it, aren't they?
I think I read something in the papers recently that the amount of seaweed that's being farmed, and that is to say being harvested, is now far exceeding the amount that's it's a totally unsustainable amount that's being taken out of the sea. And there's a lot of people certainly who are removing seaweed, harvesting seaweed, that they're not actually doing anything to cultivate it either. I think it's obviously seems to be a a rising trend in food. Obviously for health benefits and for flavor and all sorts of things, it's definitely more so on the radar now than ever. And I don't know a lot about it, I suppose, but yeah, I think it's definitely, I believe that it's, people are taking too much out of the water and not taking it in the right sort of way.
Given the fact that you forage an awful lot for what you do, how do you make those decisions yourself?
We listen to Franny Radigan. No, we just, like very simple. Obviously, we're not taking very much, but just following like simple techniques and methods for, making sure that you harvest it in the right way so that it can grow back, not taking too much from one area, moving about and kind of spreading where you're gonna harvest your seaweed from.
Someone said to me once, the best approach is actually like a third for you, a third for the animals around us, and then a third for the environment. You just leave it. The problem is, how do you know what a third is if you're not 100% sure how much other people are taking as well? Katie?
I don't know. I guess for us, for our project, we're only feeding 30 people a night, so the amount of seaweed we're taking is pretty minuscule in that way. I think you know when it feels good. You know if you're picking wild food and you're foraging and you're bringing it to a restaurant or even for home use, you know the point where where it's beneficial and you're showing people and you're giving them wild food, and you know the part that you're being greedy. You know that in food, you know that in life. It's, I guess.
Jack, one of the things that you mentioned, or perhaps someone mentioned on the video, was this idea that actually addressing some of these big global issues, they said, it seems so simple to me, you just need to make a change. And yet for a lot of people, that is the most difficult part, is making a change. What's your best advice in terms of people who have a sense that they want to do something at a local level? But it is quite hard, isn't it? It's quite hard to put your neck out and say, actually, this is what we need to do.
It is. It's difficult, and it's a little bit daunting as well. But I think by providing tools and platforms which make that process as easy as possible, and really, cutting out all the jargon, cutting out all the complication, really getting to the bare basics. And that way, whether you're providing an online platform or a physical event, as we do Events D3 in Festival 21, by just making it as simple as possible, then that, in a sense, will hopefully reach out to the maximum amount of people as possible. So really keeping it simple and really cutting out all the unnecessities.
Yes.
So really simplicity and
Shantanu, do you have any advice for people who do want to do something different at a local level? And even, it's so inspiring hearing the discussions about schools. I know in the school that my children are at, the parents are often talking about things that they're not happy about, but it seems very, very hard to make that actual shift into doing something.
It's that system too of thinking. I'm telling you, we're lazy. Gee, that's a really difficult one. I kind of mentioned it before that you can use things to almost manipulate an audience into something quite negative. And if you look at history and wars and things like that, that happens all the time. And I think we could actually do that in a positive sense. So if you sit down and you're talking to someone who doesn't share ideals about saving the planet, then the thing that you could do is to completely avoid trying to address that topic right up front, because they're going to completely shut down and wanting to accept anything that you're about to say. So if you're going into to talk to somebody and they don't care about the environment, or they don't care about food waste, or they don't care about any of the topics that we're covering, that it's actually probably more beneficial to sit down and think about how you can kind of duck under that and come in the back end and almost manipulate them into going, oh, okay, I'm going to readdress my thinking, because you can't change their belief, but you can almost like fuel them to start thinking their own way in a different direction. And I think that's on a local level, on a world scale. I travel a lot, and I see that all over the world, that there's all these little communities that are trying to do all these different things, and the people, when something great comes in front of their face, if they actually don't even want to engage with it, they will not. And you need to kind of really think of a creative way. And it often comes back to creativity these days, because you can flash images, you can show videos, and I think the rate at which we were interested in a topic used to be about 3 months, and then we would kind of forget about it. And I would say if we're probably pushing a few days now, where after a few days' time, you hear something brutal, you hear something amazing or this or that, or an opportunity to change something big, people will kind of engage for a few days and then you'll
So
lose
are
their
you saying
interest
that
again.
actually throwing facts at people doesn't make a huge amount of difference, but it's sentiment and emotion that might actually shift?
Potentially, I can only speak from my perspective. If you throw facts at me, I question how the hell you got those facts and if I can prove you wrong or not. And so if you throw facts at people, they kind of go, oh wow, that's really interesting. And it might change their thinking for a moment, but it might not be enough to be able to actually change their doing. I would say, just from my perspective, that isn't enough. That if you just offer a whole lot of facts, that it's not going to actually do anything, because we've got facts all day long flashing in our faces about the problems in the world. But it's not until you can actually jump aboard someone who's doing something quite interesting and innovative and really kind of catches you in a different way that you then engage with them, rather than a fact that you see someone tweet about or something on their phone.
So-called fact. Yeah.
So-called fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well listen, what we're going to do, are there any other questions or comments that anyone would like to make before we wrap up? Yes. There's a microphone coming to you.
Hi, I have a question for Dillisk. And back to the point about something being innovative and new and interesting. Who were your audience? Who were your customers and how did you get them?
Who are our customers? Well, I guess, Katie and I had been living and working in Dublin for quite a long time before we moved to Galway to do the project. Naturally, in the course of that, our social lives, professional lives, you built up, a big network of friends and connections, many of whom would work in the similar sorts of, the similar industry. I guess, so from that we had a large pool of people from Dublin. I guess, I don't know, the people who wanted to go there were probably just looking for some sort of an adventure, people who were prepared to, take a couple of days, drive down, spend a night or two.
Was it a hunch, or was it something that people were actually saying to you? I wish there was something like this.
No, for us, we just wanted to go there ourselves. We were just trying to figure out a way that we could spend a summer there. That's what it was, because we were sick of only maybe getting 1 week here or 2 weeks there, and it had been since we were young children was the last time that we got to spend a whole summer. So we said we would do it for ourselves. It was. I guess people didn't know what they were in for. They had no idea what it was going to be like down there. So there was a certain element of mystery attached to it. And I'd say the customers were people who, the idea, what little they knew of it, probably sparked some sort of an appeal or a desire to go and find out and see what it was. So I don't really know how to answer that question exactly.
Katie?
I think though as well what happened with Dillisk is that we had a few people from kind of projects that we'd both done up in Dublin that were already kind of aware of what we were doing. And so we kind of told them, okay, we've decided to do this crazy little project in a boat shed. And they were like, okay, well, we trust you, so we'll come. And without having to put too much money or any really time into marketing or anything, word of mouth is your strongest thing, I think. It always is. And if people believe in what you're doing and they really like what you're doing, how that news travels is so fast, it's crazy. And so for the first week that we ever opened, we kind of had a few seats here and there that were gone, and then the weekend continued like that. And the following weekend, we sold out all of our tickets for the rest of the summer. And then the next year, when we came to it, we sold all our tickets out, and I think it was like an hour and a half or 2 hours, without ever having to put in any ads in any newspapers or anything like that, because word of mouth is so strong.
Wonderful. Yeah. Okay, we are going now to break for coffee, and we are back at 11:45 with a fabulous array of talks, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end of that session as well. The coffee is upstairs, so you don't even need to leave the building. Just to say a big thank you to all our guests, Jack Fisher, Shantanu Starick, Katie Sanderson and Jasper O'Connor. Thank you very much indeed. And you're all around all weekend.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yeah, wonderful. So back at 11:45. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.